talk about it.
Well, hey Jeff, I mean, you laid out last week, pretty thoroughly kind of what happened. Any updates from Friday to now? Any new test results? Any new data points? Anything like that would help update this?
No new test results. Yeah, I mean, as I said last Friday, I mean, I've been doing this, in this business for 20 years, and this is the case where the puzzles fit, or the pieces to the puzzle fit absolutely perfectly. So hopefully, no doubt in anybody's mind. Again, to remind everybody, the multivitamin, which was organic, plant-based, said lab tested on it, very benign supplement, turned out to have 1/10,000th of one dose. So basically, this drug, LGD-4033, is taken in a pill form, usually a milligram or two, and 1/10,000th was what was located in the capsule, and it correlated perfectly to the levels that were in his urine sample, which ranged, right around the 50 picogram range. So, not only did it provide, a perfect, very clear answer, but it also gave us a lot of, confidence in this threshold issue that we're putting forward, because, this is exactly what we don't want to do, is punish someone and stop someone from fighting when they have these ultra low levels that are giving them unequivocally, and that was the word from the USADA scientists, unequivocally no performance enhancing benefit.
Jeff, I think part of the confusion was, as you said, you're kind of implementing these thresholds,
Yep.
but they haven't really been publicly announced yet, and so it kind of feels a little bit from the outside like, are we making this up as we go along? So, are there plans to announce these changes more publicly so that we know they're available?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it's going to be next week. And look, the reason why we haven't done that is we want to be as comprehensive as possible. We are scouring over the approximately 13,000 tests we've done in this program, looking at the positives, talking to other professional sports leagues, talking to some of the scientists who actually invented some of these substances. So we want to be as thorough as possible. Luckily, from an optics standpoint, we had Neil Magny out in California on the 15th of that stakeholder meeting, and he talked exactly about this issue and this same substance. So I think that shows that, look, this wasn't, treating Nate special because he's the main event for the BMF belt. So that was 2 days before USADA notified us of that initial, low level. So the 15th, Magny was out in California, talked about this issue, and then the 17th, 2 days later, is when we first learned about Nate.
I know you said you didn't do anything, differently or unique because it was main event, but it was done really, really fast. I know you guys worked hard on timing, but can other fighters expect that type of, expeditious nature of handling?
Yeah, we're absolutely, and that myself and Donna Marcolini, that's what we do, and that's kind of the beauty of having an independent administrator of your program, is it frees us up to be an advocate for the athlete, to be eyes and ears, so that when something like this happens, we can, put our stuff into action. Yeah, look, if anyone's, criticizing us for all hands on deck getting this done quick for a main event fight, okay, bring that on. That's just a reality. But every other fighter on the roster is going to get our help and our services, just like, we did with Nate in this case.
And last thing for me, Jeff, you said you're looking at all 13,000 tests and that sort of thing. I've seen some fighters wondering, would there be any retroactive, look at previous cases? Of course, suspensions that have been handled have been happening. There's nothing you could do, but
yeah,
you could potentially clear somebody's name, right? By saying, you know what, these in the past were considered positives. We don't consider them positives anymore, so we're wiping the slate. Is that something that would be looked at?
Yeah, potentially. There's provision in our policy called Lex Meteor, and it basically gives you the benefit of any rule changes retroactively. So that's a possibility. Yeah, it's difficult. Look, we're acting as fast as we can, but I know it's cliche, but it's true. We go on the best science available at the time, and 2-3 years ago, we just didn't have the science here, and that's what we've been doing, over this last year. I think I first spoke about the issue of thresholds publicly when I did Rogan last December. So again, this is no secret. This is not, for those of you thinking that, this is not because this is Nate Diaz and the BMF title. This was in the works for almost a year now. The World Anti-Doping Agency, or WADA, under whose prohibited list we operate, they've had a working group, and this is public knowledge, for about the last year looking at this threshold issue. They haven't come to an agreement yet. We basically said, look, we can't wait any longer. This is absolutely the right thing to do. We keep seeing this more and more. We live in a more and more contaminated world. We're going to continue to see it more, and we need to do something immediately.
And just to make it clear, it was 2 samples at the LGD 2033. he showed up in, right?
3 samples.
Three
actually.
samples.
Yeah, and I know you were talking about the timeline, so let me kind of get that to you guys here. So on the first collection was done on October 9th. We had CSAC, where we talked about this issue publicly on the 15th. The 17th was the initial positive. That showed positive for some of the metabolite. Very low level, under that 1/1000th of the pooled concentration of urine that we talked about in California. That same night, USADA got another collection from him. And that's what happens when these cases come down. I tell fighters, the more tests you get, if you're not doing anything on purpose, they're your friend. Now, if you're cheating, you don't want to be tested more, but if you're not, the more data points that we can gather, the better. So that's why they sent someone out on the night of the 17th. That result came back with a parent compound of about 50 picograms. Then they did another collection. That date was the, I think, 22nd, and that came back with 49 picograms. Again, based on, you talking to Nate when he was taking this multivitamin, it matched perfectly. And we waited, and we did this on purpose. And I know Nate came out publicly this week and said, look, UFC told me not to talk about this. He was asked who it was and didn't say, well, I was the one that talked to him. And I'll tell you exactly what I said. I said, look, we've changed our policy now where we don't publicly announce things. We have this threshold for this substance. I think you're going to fall under. So look, if you don't want it out there, then I wouldn't tell anybody or not talk about that. Anyone who insinuates that that means we weren't going to tell the commission, that is absolutely false. The minute that first positive test came in, I called Hunter, who I report to. Dana was brought in, and we started talking about, okay, we need to get the commission as much data as possible. Let's wait until we accumulate it all, and that's exactly what happened. And Hunter said this, and I think Kim Sumwer, the executive director, has verified it, that reached out to her before Nate went public with this, so they were in that loop.
And then when was the first time that Nate was informed that something that might be wrong?
So, I mean, it was when we heard of the first test on the 17th. It was through his team, but yeah, that was when we found out.
And then Nate goes public with it last Thursday. And
yep.
Then, all of us are freaking out. What's going on behind the scenes with you guys?
So that night, the supplements he was using were at the laboratory and being tested, and I got the call at I think it was 4 in the morning, which would have been Friday by this point, saying that we found it. They actually found it on the last. It was the same supplement, but the last 2 that they put on the machine. So the scientists were like a little frustrated. They're like, oh, what are the odds it's going to be these last 2? And it turned out there it was. It lit up like a Christmas tree. That's something with these substances, these SARMs. Ironically, they're very, very easy to detect. The scientists told me, look, if you're an athlete trying to cheat, these would not be the substances you'd want to use, because the term is they light up like a Christmas tree on the machines that they use to detect them. There's many other substances out there, and I won't talk about them because I don't want to lay a blueprint down, but would be very difficult to detect. And I have 20 years of experience talking with athletes, knowing what those protocols look like, and SARMs aren't any part of those protocols.
And this was the Smyrna lab in Salt Lake City.
Correct. The water approved, Dr. Eichner. Yep.
And then as soon as it comes back that it was indeed a pain supplement at 4 a.m., is that the moment where it's like, all right, Nate is pretty much clear? We
had to wait for one more thing, that third test. Those results came back on Friday afternoon, and that's why I know a lot of you guys were asking for a statement, and we wanted to get all that data in. What we didn't want to see, obviously, is his number spike up, above that threshold, because that would have been a different circumstance, but it was obviously well under, and once we had that, we put the statement out.
What would have happened if it came over that?
Yeah, I mean, it probably would consider it an adverse test. I don't know. I think what this does really well is verify that those numbers that we've set are appropriate. Because 1/10,000th of a dose, what if it was double or triple that? That's still a very, very small amount, and I think would still fall under that 100 picogram level. So I feel pretty comfortable with it.
Do you have any chance of a positive test on the commission?
Yeah, I mean, look, that's something people criticize. There's criticism of this program out there. In the old days, we would have run into real trouble, I think, because commissions would have been doing testing using the same laboratories with the same level of sensitivity. And this isn't a knock on the commissions, but unless you do this full time, and study these things like, USADA, who runs our program like we do, it's difficult to get an understanding of it. So, I mean, I would guess if we didn't have this program, you'd be seeing quite a few positive tests on the commission level at very low levels. And again, no fault of theirs, just probably wouldn't be knowledgeable enough to see that, hey, we have this issue, and there would be, suspensions left and right. So, it's an interesting kind of dynamic that this program's in place, obviously, to catch cheaters, but what it's actually doing now, I think, is protecting, unintentional ingestors of these prohibited substances.
But in competition, like if it's flagged at all by the commission, they can act independently of USADA, correct?
They can, but that was part of the purpose of going out to California, and there's good momentum, I think, from at least the major commissions and even the head of the ABC, that we realize, and we talked about this in California, uniformity is key here, right? It doesn't do us any good to have these thresholds and some commission comes in and says, wait, no, we don't adhere to those. That's a positive test under our rules. So that's a big part of what we've been doing, and maybe part of the reason for delaying the announcement is like we're trying to get all the commissions on board and go out and educate them and let them know why, hey, this is the right thing to do. I mean, Andy Foster's a huge proponent of this, right? He talked in that meeting about what a pain in the ass it is to be spinning your wheels on these cases where you're not looking at intentional dopers and cheaters. So he doesn't want to do that, and we don't want to do that.
Jeff, would it be fair to assume that if he never broke the news, we would never have known about this?
Probably. I mean, again, the reason that we did that, and hey, it's on me. You want to get as much transparency, I think, as you can in an anti-doping program, but when that impedes on, the fairness and due process of an athlete, and that's unfortunately something that we saw. We saw positive tests early on where we'd announce them right away. Then that athlete's labeled as a cheater, and it's hard to reel back in that headline. Headline on the front page, retraction on the back, right? So, we changed that. We saw that was an issue, and so, I mean, had Nate not talked about it, it wouldn't be out there. But, and in fact, I was talking to a prominent manager this week about that, and he said, man, his term was, what a gangster move by Nate. And I'm like, no kidding. Like, if you're really not doing something on purpose and you're told, look, this isn't going to get out there unless you talk about it, and you go out and talk about it anyway, I mean, you talk about proof in the pudding for what kind of guy he is. I mean, he's legit when he talks about anti-steroid and plant-based whole foods. I mean, all the supplements he was using, on the face at least, look very, very benign. They're all organic, plant-based, that you would buy at Whole Foods, Costco, whatever.
And an interesting byproduct of all of this is that, like, even at open workouts, the fans start checking if USADA didn't do anything wrong here. Again, tainted supplement.
Yeah.
How do you try? Is there any way to try to educate the guys about what they're doing?
Great question. So another part of our revision of the new policy is we are going to now have much more clarity in supplements. So one of the biggest questions that Donna Marcolini, who works with me, and I get is, what are the USADA approved supplements? And to date, our answer is, well, technically there's no USADA approved. Here's the ones they recommend, and then the next question is, well, what if I use that and something happens? And we say, well, no guarantee. Once say that, everything else we say goes in one ear and out the other, because they want to hear approved. We are going to have approved supplements going forward when we make this announcement. We've identified several third-party certifiers, and under the UFC program, those will be approved. Should anything happen to a fighter as a result of using those, it's a virtual get-out-of-jail-free card. Now, they may have to sit out if it's, their levels are over a certain amount, if they do get a performance-enhancing benefit, but there'll be no repercussions. I think that's going to make a huge difference. Major League Baseball does something like that. They only allow these certified supplements into the clubhouse. And I mean, they have the advantage over us here because the team shows up to work every day, where we have athletes spread amongst almost 50 countries. But since they instituted that only these, they use NSF for sport, only those are allowed in the clubhouse. I mean, their rate of positive tests have gone down significantly. And they have the major sports now. I don't think they're as good as ours, but they have the best program in the major
When's that
sports.
coming out? That list?
Baseball or?
No, yours.
Ours should be next week.
Next week.
Yep.
It's going to be a full list?
Yep.
Wow.
And Jeff,
So there'll be thousands of I mean, I think right now we've identified 4 third-party certification companies. If you add up all the supplements they certify, more than 1,000, and they're available worldwide.
And that'll be public?
It will be public, yep.
And in terms of like the get out of jail free, quote unquote,
Yeah.
you'd still need to test that supplement, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, you still have to
Still need to
identify, hey,
find it.
something
Now,
happened here.
Unless they were under the threshold. So
Right.
now under the threshold, look, it's always ideal, in this case was, to find the culprit, to find where it came from. But in the case where you can't, and again, we just upped our testing numbers by 1,500 tests a year this year. So we're getting so many data points, rarely now do we see a case where an athlete hasn't been tested in the last month or two. So again, that's a benefit to the clean athlete. You want more testing on you. It protects you ultimately, potentially.
What is the annual budget for testing?
Multi-million dollars. Yeah, it's not a cheap program, and that's a tough thing in anti-doping. Especially, you look at MMA, and I get all these regional, local promoters saying like, man, I'd love to have this program, but like, shoot, I can't afford it. One thing I think is positive in here that we're seeing is that trickle-down effect, because most normally the path to the UFC is that last-minute injury replacement, right? You get a call from Sean or Mick 2 weeks out, so-and-so's fallen off, you want a contract. If you're not clean at that point and haven't been clean, your first test potentially could be a positive one, and that includes not only purposefully not doing things, but making smart supplement choices. So I think, as I talk to managers, and it's been a little bit of a slow process, but that's percolating out there, and I think we're seeing the rest of MMA cleaned up a little bit because of this program.
In Q3, Sean O'Malley was tested like 10 times. Where's his case at right now?
Yeah, still, he's still pulsing with that substance, and again, that just pays even more attention to this issue that, here you've got a fighter, which there's no evidence he did it on purpose. He obviously knows he's being tested all the time. To think that he would continue to be doing this is crazy. He's as careful as you can get right now, but again, these laboratories have gotten so good that they can detect things in the body for, in his case, a year. John Jones, the whole M3 picogram metabolite, 2.5 years it was showing up in his system. That scares the hell out of me, because how are you going to prepare a regional or a local show fighter for 3.5 years to be clean before he gets to the UFC? And again, that's yet another reason why we instituted these thresholds.
The UFC signed Amir Ali-Akbari, who had a history of positive drug tests. He was tested once by USADA, and now Brave has come out and said that he's fighting there. What happened with him?
So he's the Iranian fighter. Yeah, so he was sanctioned by his wrestling federation. And so under our program, we looked at the rules and said, hey, you're still under sanction. I think he got a lifetime ban.
Yeah.
Was it? Yeah. So I guess I wasn't aware that he actually was tested once on our program, and that may have been one where it fell through the cracks initially, and they got a test on him because he didn't compete for us because we identified that he was under a lifetime ban, and we would adhere to any other sanctioning bodies like that for a sanction like that.
So he's not under UFC contact now then?
No.
And he hasn't been sanctioned by USADA or anything?
Nope. Has not. Nope.
Jeff, I'm still a little bit confused on
Yeah.
Inhalergate. Did Greg do something wrong?
Yeah, so look, in my world, and Kevin Ioli tweeted something out, in the USADA world, no. So that substance is allowed at all times, in and out of competition, as long as you keep it under a certain level. So I think it's 800 micrograms per 12 hours. Each puff of inhaler is 90. So, unless you're, puffing a dozen times, you're going to stay under that. Now, the other issue, obviously, is the commission issue, and I think we all saw on tape that he asked the inspector, who's part of the commission, could he do this? And the inspector said yes. So, but my understanding is technically you can't do that, and the inspector was misinformed.
So why is it a no contest?
I think because he used that substance, it's I guess against the rules of the commission, is my understanding. It's a little bit outside of my realm, maybe more of a Mark Ratner question than mine.
Would he be allowed to use it?
I don't think so. I think it would be okay, and most commissions would be okay with you taking a puff in the back before you walked out, but I don't think any commission allows any substances other than, water, bottled water, inside the cage. Greg actually, when he onboarded into this program, cleared it through Donna and I. He declared it to every time he's fought, including before the commission. So look, he wasn't the evidence is he wasn't trying to hide anything.
And so, since his next fight is not in the U.S., it's in Moscow, will he be allowed to?
No, but I mean, because we'll self-regulate and have the same rules. I think we follow like Nevada's rules. So no, he wouldn't be allowed to use it.
Just to be clear, that it's not an anti-doping situation at all.
Correct. It's not an anti-doping.
It's more of a commission
rule,
regulatory in-fight.
Exactly.
Right.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.